Deadlines. This dreaded word can send a chill down the spine of even the most seasoned storyboard artist. If you're tired of feeling like your drawing speed is the bottleneck between you and meeting those tight deadlines, then stick with me. I'll be sharing some powerful exercises. No, not that kind. In fact, these will be drawing exercises designed to boost your productivity, reduce stress, and help you deliver your best work on time. Now, I recently created a survey for storyboard artists to discover what their main pain points are, and one thing in particular kept popping out often in their responses. Many told me they're unable to draw fast enough to meet deadlines. Now, to be fair, this is a very common problem, especially for those just starting off in this field. In the past, let's say when you were young and just learning to draw, no one was standing over top of you with a stopwatch dictating how much time you should be spending on your drawings. On the contrary, you were probably drawing for the pure enjoyment and pleasure it gave you. But as soon as you introduce a time element, then suddenly pleasure is quickly replaced by stress, since you must turn your work in on time or run the risk of never being hired again.
You're fired.
Fired?
Essentially ending your career before it even has a chance to take off. Sounds a bit brutal, doesn't it? Now, of course, there's no magic bullet that will immediately help you draw faster. You'll still have to put in the time and practice to make it happen. But with the exercises I'm about to show you, you'll eventually reach a point where you'll be able to tackle any project with speed and efficiency. And this in turn will make your job so much more enjoyable, as it should be, right? I mean, after all, we're getting paid to draw all day. So with that said, let's get started with the first exercise. In order to draw faster, you must start to draw more with your arm than with your wrist. A lot of artists just starting out tend to draw mostly with their wrist, which is understandable because that's how we write with a pen. We don't usually use our entire arms when writing except for maybe when we're signing our signatures. Now, you will, of course, still use your wrist in certain instances, like when adding details to an object, the features of someone's face, for example. But starting off using your wrist will absolutely slow you down and start to sabotage your quickness and efficiency right off the bat. So before I show you what I mean by this, we first have to understand the mechanics of the arm and how they can best be used to draw certain features. So the arm has three main pivot points, starting with the shoulder, which is going to allow you to draw the largest shapes, then your elbow, which allows you to draw medium-sized shapes, and finally ending with your wrist, which we use to draw on the fine details as I previously mentioned. When you first start to sketch out your frame in very rough format, using your whole arm is going to allow you to do this very rapidly and with a fluidity you wouldn't be able to achieve by just using your wrist alone. Let me show you what I mean. So as you can see here, I'm quickly roughing out a frame by using my entire arm. This allows me to concentrate on the larger, more important shapes and prevents me from starting to get hung up on the details because, believe me, you will absolutely lose a great deal of time if you start to immediately noodle away at small features, and I can pretty much guarantee you'll miss your deadline as a result. Like many others, I also used to struggle with this, wanting to jump right into the detailing phase before I had the whole composition sketched out first, because let's face it, that's the fun part. But with time, I've learned to avoid doing this. Now, if you don't normally draw like this, then it will probably take some time for you to get used to this feeling. A few exercises you can do first as warm-up are as follows. Draw ellipses of different shapes and sizes over and over and over. You'll see how much harder it is for me to try to do this just by using my wrist alone. Now, draw long swooping lines that curve back and forth across the canvas, again using your entire arm. And finally, you can practice drawing parallel lines first using your shoulder, and these will be the longest, by the way, then your elbow, and finally your wrist, which will end up being the shortest. Now that you're all warmed up, let's try drawing a head at an angle. So when I start to draw a head, I usually like to draw a circle first, and you can see I'm using my entire arm to do this. Then I extend the lines down further to form his jawline, and also place a center line right down the middle of his face, and sketch in his ears, and now I'm putting in his eye line, drawing in his nose, where his nose should be, and sketching in the eyes. He's kind of squinting a little bit as he's smiling, kind of with a sly little look on his face. And then lastly his mouth. We'll do a little bottom lip line. Then now I'm just gonna go back over my sketch and just try to define it a little bit better. I'm not gonna go crazy here, of course. Little neck and shoulders and a little shadow underneath the chin, and that'll about do it. As storyboard artists, we're tasked with knowing how to draw pretty much everything from people to animals to vehicles, as well as architecture. Very few artists in the world are capable of drawing everything imaginable without the use of some type of reference. Now, Kim Jung-gi was one of the lone exceptions, who was the ultimate example for being able to draw the most mind-blowing illustrations strictly from his imagination. But that is so incredibly rare and is what made him a worldwide sensation. You just don't see that very often. So Kim Jung-gi aside, pretty much everyone else will have to use some reference material. But if you really want to get faster at drawing everything, my advice would be to not just rely completely on reference, as there will be jobs with super short deadlines which won't allow you enough time to properly gather all of your reference material prior to starting. So I would strongly advise you start to practice drawing all sorts of objects from reference whenever you have any free time. Now with storyboards, the majority of what you'll be drawing will be humans, so I'd suggest starting there. To help me practice drawing people performing all sorts of different actions, I've purchased several photo packs from a couple of vendors on ArtStation who produce and sell these for a living. They're all very high quality and often feature models who are scantily clad or who are wearing a myriad of unique costumes. You can usually buy these packs on sale for well under $10, and I believe they're well worth it to practice drawing humans faster. I'll leave a link to them in the description below. Let me show you how I use them to draw from reference. I often do exactly what I'm about to show you as a warm-up prior to starting a storyboarding gig. It really loosens me up and prepares my mind to start thinking more anatomically, I guess, if that even makes sense. So I'm going to demonstrate for you two different techniques you can use. So this first technique is called the Scribble method, and it is pretty much exactly as it sounds. Sketching this way is almost more like sculpting than drawing, as you slowly build up the character and form as you go. The key is to never let your arm stop moving. You just keep scribbling and building, scribbling and building. This frees up both your mind and your arm and prevents you from focusing too much on those pesky details. Now, as I've mentioned in a prior video, I often like to start to draw a character either from their hips, chest, or shoulders, as I feel it helps me to more accurately draw everything else in proportion, rather than starting with the head and then having to work all the way down to the feet. By the time you get to the feet, it's likely something else will stand out as being out of proportion. Now finally, once you've created a completed form from your skeleton of scribbles, let's say, that you've built up, then if you prefer, you can go in and start to add some darker contour lines that really help you define the character and its shape more clearly. Now, speaking of contour lines, the next technique is appropriately called the contour method. When using this method, I start to look for the main contour lines of the figure and draw those first. Sometimes I'll draw a through line that indicates the general shape and flow of the action, and then we'll fill it in around this with contour lines. So to reiterate, the purpose of these sketches is just to capture the general pose and fluidity of the model and not necessarily to capture every single detail. Every once in a while, when I have time, I might take a sketch all the way to finish, including drawing in the smaller features as well as some of the shading and lighting. But for the purposes of this exercise, capturing the essence of the character is what we're after. Once you've spent a great deal of practice drawing from reference and are starting to feel more comfortable, it's now time to add in an important factor that will unfortunately diminish some of that comfort you've been feeling. That's right, I'm talking about adding a time limit to your drawings. Now, this is nothing new, as most life drawing classes infuse this type of challenge into their sessions, along with much longer poses, of course. But the use of a timer is meant to help you speed up your process and capture only the most necessary of shape lines in order to clearly indicate the proper form of a model. Nothing more beyond that. I would suggest first starting your countdown timer at 1 minute and then gradually working your way down to 30 seconds. You could of course go less than that, but honestly I don't think it's very necessary. The next exercise I'm about to demonstrate is a bit more advanced, but I still would like you to give it a try. Now remember, there's no one watching you and you can always erase and start over if necessary. So I want you to start off by choosing to draw a simple character. It doesn't have to be realistic. In fact, for this exercise, it's probably better off if you choose something that's more cartoony with simple shapes for anatomy. Now I want you to draw that character across the top of your page at least 5 times, with each pose you draw varying from the last. Next, starting with the character furthest left in the space below it, I want you to draw that same exact pose but from a completely different angle. It's a bit tricky as you'll have to really visualize this in your head. Then, move to the next character in the top row and draw that pose also from a different angle, continuing all the way across until you've completed the entire row. Then, do it all again, creating a third row of characters all in the same poses as the 2 above them, but once again from a completely different angle. As mentioned, this is a very, very tricky exercise that forces you to think spatially as well as anatomically. Don't stress if one of the poses doesn't look quite right. Honestly, it's difficult for me as well, but doing this exercise will start to allow you to draw anything from any angle, even if you only have one reference photo from which to work. Remember, building speed and efficiency takes time, practice, and patience, but the payoff is well worth it. With these techniques, you'll be able to tackle deadlines with confidence and maybe even start to enjoy the process a little more. So what do you think? Will you try these exercises? Or maybe you have some ideas of your own I should know about. Well, if that's the case, please write them down in the comments, as I'll be back in the future to continue this topic with more tips and tricks, and who knows, I might just include yours. Now, if you found this video helpful, I've got something else you won't want to miss. In my last video, I walk you through my entire storyboarding process from start to finish, and you could check that out right here. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.